Sherry hadn't been interested enough about what I was doing to come outside for a look, much less to spend any time with me. I guess she was just happy I was out of her way so she could get ready for her date, or whatever she was calling it. That was fine with me. If she'd come out to be with me, she'd have seen the rent-a-lemon I'd arranged for that morning. I hadn't wanted to park the shabby-looking wreck on the street. It might have been towed as an abandoned vehicle. It was a small lie, I suppose, hiding the rental's existence. That's what's wrong with lying and cheating. The lies begin to take on a life of their own and reproduce more of their kind spontaneously. There were 3 more lies told as she walked out the door. I wished her a good time, and we both said we loved each other. A man and a woman who loved each other wouldn't be doing the things to each other that we were going to do tonight. I told myself I didn't care. When she was far enough down the block not to be able to see inside the garage, I opened the outside door and jumped in the rental car. Driving away, I pointed the remote over my shoulder to close the door and sped down our residential street to make sure I didn't lose contact with her. Paradoxically, I had to slow drastically when I saw her ahead, waiting at a stoplight for cross-traffic to clear. I had to pull to the curb and stop for a bit, or I'd have gotten too close. As it turned out, following her didn't prove to be that big a problem. Like most drivers, she paid almost no attention to the traffic behind her, and, even if she had, she wouldn't have known to look for a beat-up, 8-year-old gray Chrysler sedan. She had no idea that her husband was in that vehicle tonight and tailing her, half a city block behind. The light was still good enough for me to be able to identify her vehicle, but it was gradually getting darker. It gave me an excuse to turn on my headlights. If she were to look back, she wouldn't be able to see my face past the glare. I followed her through thinning traffic to the far southwest side of town and watched her pull into a moderately priced motel. I quickly found a space across the street and parallel parked my ratty old vehicle. Getting my camera ready and trying to settle my jangled nerves, I watched out the driver's side window while my wife sat in her car for 5 minutes or so. It seemed she was impatient. She made a series of quick calls on her cell phone. Mine didn't ring. It was not me she was calling. A few minutes later, a big dark blue SUV came down the street and turned into the motel. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. I could see the driver was a male, but he was going too fast for me to get a good look at him. He parked beside my wife's Taurus, and they both got out. Shortly, the guy had my wife in a tight embrace and was kissing her hungrily. After a bit, she patted his chest and pulled back a little. I'd bought a Nikon Dimage Z1 digital camera when I started planning this operation a couple of weeks ago. Even with my limited experience with digital cameras, it looked like this camera was going to be perfect for the job I had to do. I started snapping away, taking pictures of my cheating wife and the guy she was screwing. Though twilight was fading into night, there was still enough illumination under the motel's exterior lighting to light up both of them. The camera's 10x optical zoom multiplied by its 4x digital zoom gave me superb close-ups of his hand, trying to squeeze her chest. I could have counted the freckles on my lovely wife's face if I'd been in a counting mood. My only real problem was keeping the camera steady enough. I solved that by scrunching down low, rolling down the window, and bracing the camera on the 2 inches of glass that refused to disappear into the door. Neither of the cheaters across the way noticed me, though I was less than 50 yards away under a streetlight. They were awfully careless. I guess it was true that cheaters begin believing they don't have to take elementary precautions because they can't be caught. The guy produced one of those plastic cards with the magnetic strip on the back and opened the motel room door. He and my wife went inside and I settled back to wait them out. I wanted some pictures of them leaving the room to show how long they'd been inside. The camera had the ability to insert a date stamp on the face of the digital pictures, and the downloaded .jpg file would show the precise date and time it was saved in the camera. I thought a computer expert would explain such things well enough so any court could understand it, even if the judge wouldn't accept my explanation. I was sure my attorney would be able to find and hire such an expert. My stomach was churning. The bitter taste of bile was in my mouth. I was barely able to control stomach contractions that kept threatening to force partially digested bits back up my esophagus. The longer I waited, the worse it got. Abruptly, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I wrenched the car door open and spewed an ugly pool of nastiness out onto the pavement. The flood kept regenerating itself long after I thought I'd brought up everything I'd eaten for the last several days. After a minute or two, though, there was nothing more in my stomach. It got painful then. The dry heaves continued for another eternity before gradually dying away. I wiped my mouth on my handkerchief, rinsed my mouth out, and drank a half-liter bottle of water. Shaking with anger, humiliation, and feeling a sense of loss so strong I could barely stand it, I stepped over the mess in the street and walked a few yards up and down the curb to see if it would help settle me down. I glanced at the room door over there, making sure they hadn't come out yet. I stopped in my tracks. There was only a dim glow coming through most of the drawn curtains, but at one place, down low on the left side, there was a small area where the light came through more brightly. I was intrigued. I looked all around to make sure I was unobserved. Then I crossed the street and walked through the motel parking lot. From a few feet away, I could see that my dear wife and the sorry bastard who was with her had been inexcusably sloppy for two people doing something they shouldn't. They left a space a couple of inches across where the curtain had not quite been pulled closed. I glanced around again, checking to see if anyone could see what I was about to do. I decided that I really didn't care what anyone else thought, even if someone did see me. This was an opportunity to photograph these two in flagrante delicto, and I was going to take it. I knelt on one knee and eased the camera up to the window, aiming it through the opening in the drapes. The LCD screen on the back of the camera lit up when I pressed the power button, and I had my proof. My wife was on all fours on the bed with a short, stocky man with blonde hair getting into position behind her. He was, I guess, the kind of man women thought of as handsome. He looked to be a little younger than me, but it was hard to tell. My hands were trembling too badly for the camera to focus properly, and I had to press the lens against the window. It took some experimentation to get a good series of pics. If I let too much of a gap develop between the window and lens, the harsh brightness of the lights out here reflected off the glass and tended to wash everything out. In a minute or two, though, I had everything I needed. Inside the room, I could see the guy beginning to slam his C in and out. He wasn't gentle about it, but it appeared Sherry had developed a taste for a little rough because her face was screwed up in a mask of lust and pleasure. The camera could take 6 pictures in a fast sequence, and I'd put it on that setting before leaving home. I pressed the shutter release button again and again. I couldn't take too much of watching them, still badly nauseated and feeling more pain inside than I'd known since my parents died. I settled back on my haunches and tried to get myself together. I drew in a ragged breath and closed my eyes tight to fight back the tears I refused to shed. I hurt, but a human being can only hurt so long before they shift themselves to another place. I pushed my emotions aside, damming them up and putting them back behind that door I'd thought I had closed on them earlier in the week. Suddenly, there was no more love when I thought of her, and I damned sure didn't like her at all. My new remoteness, my detached view, gave me the strength to get to my feet without swaying or feeling sick to my stomach. There was a sudden flurry of loud voices from inside the room. I could hear Sherry, but I couldn't tell what she was saying. Then there was a louder shriek a second or two later, but it sounded like a man. I didn't know any men who admitted to being screamers during but I guess they could be. Anyway, the suddenly noisy play got me on my feet and moving away. I was afraid it would attract someone to come see what was going on. I started to walk back to my rental across the street, but I paused behind the son of AB car while I thought for a long moment. I turned and walked down the sidewalk past all the motel doors. I looked carefully under the eaves, then stepped away from the building to examine the roof and every light pole in sight. I was looking for any outside security cameras the motel might have. I found a place down at the far corner of the structure where there were some unconnected wires and an empty mounting bracket, but I didn't see any cameras. I crossed the parking lot and stood next to the rental car, looking at the empty, abandoned restaurant. There were surely no spy cameras over there. There were some apartment buildings I could see on down this side street, but they were far away. On the main thoroughfare, I couldn't see any businesses that would logically be protected by surveillance cameras pointed in this direction. I made sure the cap was securely fastened over the lens and put my camera in the back seat for safekeeping. Walking purposefully, I went back to where my wife and whoever he was were parked. I pulled the pocket knife out of my jeans and opened it while I debated with myself the wisdom of doing what I was thinking of. Then I shrugged and bent low beside Loverboy's rear tires. It took a stronger thrust than I'd thought it would, but I soon found the right amount of velocity and power to shove the blade deep into the tire. I was afraid my grip would slip and I'd cut myself badly, but that didn't happen. The hissing of the air escaping from the expensive set of tires seemed terribly loud, but no one came out to investigate. Encouraged, I took care of all 4 tires on his SUV and then all my wife's tires too. I guess it was a childish gesture. It didn't solve anything, and it very well could make it clear to the cheating duo that someone was onto them. I decided they wouldn't think that. They were too cocky. I wanted to do more, but I didn't. 100 years ago, I could have smashed down the door and put a bullet in each of their brains, and no jury would have ever convicted me. 200 years ago, I could have challenged him to a duel and killed him in front of his friends and family. Those were acceptable ways back then for a man to salvage his honor in situations like this. But we're so much more civilized now. The sea has so few options open to him these days. I did what I could, feeling a little better, and not in the least guilty about the damage I'd done. I walked back to my rental and got in, slamming the door and not caring if anyone heard. I'd taken the first steps to rid myself of a faithless wife and regain some self-respect. There was little remaining yet to do. Monday would come soon and I'd have a long talk with my lawyer.